Today, we are talking about a moment in history that is, weirdly enough, both a massive military defeat and a culture-defining victory. We're going way back to 1566 for the Siege of Szigetvár. It was a bloody, desperate showdown on the edge of Europe, and the stakes were so incredibly high that the outcome probably shaped the world we live in today. Okay, just look at this claim. The famous French statesman Cardinal Richelieu supposedly called this the battle that saved Western civilization. That is a heavy statement, right? So how on earth could the fall of one tiny fortress in modern-day Hungary possibly carry that much weight? Well, let's find out. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll set the scene, with an empire knocking at Europe's door. Then we'll meet the two legendary commanders squaring off. We'll dive into the brutal month-long siege itself, witness the incredible final charge, and then we'll unpack how a so-called victory could end up feeling like a total defeat. All right, let's paint the picture. It's 1566. Europe is, frankly, a mess. The Protestant Reformation has shattered any sense of Christian unity, and you've got princes fighting princes. The Habsburg emperors aren't just fending off the Ottomans in the east, they're dealing with religious uprisings at home and constant scheming from rivals like France. And into this fractured continent, the Ottoman Empire, a unified global superpower, is on the move. Their ultimate prize? Vienna, the gateway to Central Europe. And standing in their way was a little border fort that was about to become the center of the world, Szigetvár. You know, a battle like this isn't just about armies. It's always about the people in charge. And at Szigetvár, two of the biggest names of the era were about to have their final epic showdown.
On one side, you have Count Nikola Zrinski, a Croatian nobleman, a total veteran of the brutal border wars, basically one of the most respected military men in the Habsburg kingdom. And on the other side, the one and only Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. At 72 years old, he was leading his 13th and what would be his final military campaign. One last great push to cement his already incredible legacy.
Now, this is where things get kind of nuts. Just look at these numbers. Zrinski had, maybe 2,300 defenders? Suleiman rolls up with an army of around 100,000 soldiers and 300 heavy cannons. This wasn't just going to be a tough fight. I mean, this was a full-blown David versus Goliath situation, with the fate of an empire hanging in the balance. So the Sultan's massive army shows up. The defenders are completely hopelessly outnumbered. Logically, everyone expected the fortress to fall in a matter of days. But it didn't. Instead, what happened next was over a month of just pure, stubborn defiance. Seriously, just try to imagine this scene. Tens of thousands of soldiers, a literal sea of tents, the ground shaking from hundreds of cannons, all of it focused on one tiny target. The Ottoman war machine was the most powerful on the planet, and it had arrived in full force, with the Sultan himself there to watch it all go down. You see, Szigetvár wasn't just a single castle. It was actually a complex of three different sections: the Old Town, the New Town, and the Inner Castle, all linked by bridges and surrounded by marshy swampland. And that geography was its secret weapon. That swampy ground made it a nightmare for the Ottomans to drag their heavy siege cannons into good firing positions. And the fighting was absolutely brutal. The siege kicks off on August 6th. About 2 weeks later, the Old Town falls, but the defenders just pull back to the next section. Then, on August 29th, the Ottomans launch this enormous assault and get thrown back, losing thousands of men in the process. But they just kept coming. By early September, they'd managed to mine the walls of the inner fort and set them on fire. Through all of this, Zrinski was a rock. We're told that Suleiman was actually so impressed by his resistance that he offered him a deal. Surrender, and I'll make you the ruler of all of Croatia. But Zrinski just flatly refused. His mission was simple: hold this fort, slow the Sultan down, and make his army bleed for every inch, all to buy time for the main Habsburg army to finally show up. So by September, the inner fort is literally on fire. The defenders are down to just a few hundred men. The end is coming, there's no doubt about it, but the climax of this whole story has a twist of fate that is honestly the stuff of movies. And here it is, the incredible irony of Szigetvár. On the very eve of his great victory, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent died. Not in battle, not from an arrow, but from natural causes, right there in his tent, just out of sight of the fortress he was so obsessed with taking. Now, the Ottoman commanders knew that if news of the Sultan's death got out, it could shatter the army's morale. So they made this unbelievable, high-stakes call to keep it a secret. For 48 days, orders were still being issued in the dead sultan's name, all to keep the army together long enough to secure this one last bloody victory. And that's the crucial part. The very next day, September 7th, Zrinski is preparing for his final stand, and he has no idea the great sultan is already dead. With the castle burning around him, he gets his last 600 soldiers together. But he doesn't wait for them to attack. Instead, he throws open the gates and leads a suicidal charge straight into the heart of the Ottoman army. And this just shows you the spirit of these defenders. Right before charging out to his death, Zrinski left one last surprise. He ordered a slow-burning fuse to be lit to the castle's entire supply of gunpowder. He was setting a massive booby trap for the army that was about to swarm in. The charge was, of course, heroic, but completely hopeless. Zrinski and almost all of his men were killed. The Ottomans had finally taken Szigetvár. But as the smoke started to clear, the true cost of their victory became devastatingly clear. And this brings us to this key idea, a Pyrrhic victory. It's when you technically win the battle, but you lose so much doing it that it basically feels like a loss. And Szigetvár might just be one of the greatest examples of this in all of history. Let's look at the numbers one more time. To take out Zrinski's 2,300 defenders, the Ottomans lost somewhere between 20 and 30,000 soldiers to battle and disease. And then came Zrinski's final little gift. As Ottoman troops poured into the captured fortress, the whole thing exploded, killing another 3,000 of them instantly. So yeah, the Ottoman flag was flying over the smoking ruins of Szigetvár. But they'd lost their legendary sultan. They'd lost a massive chunk of their army. And most importantly, they had lost time. The campaign season was basically over. The march to Vienna was now completely impossible. And that right there is the ultimate legacy of that one heroic last stand. The entire Ottoman advance into Central Europe was stopped dead in its tracks. It would be over 100 years before they'd threaten Vienna again. That 1 month of defiance at Szigetvár bought a century of breathing room for a Europe that was busy tearing itself apart. And that time was absolutely crucial. And the story's impact went way beyond just military strategy. For Hungarians and Croatians, the Siege of Szigetvár became a foundational national story. It inspired epic poems, paintings, even a famous opera, turning Zrinski into a national hero who sacrificed everything for his people. So, we end right back where we started. Tactically, Szigetvár was a crushing defeat. The fortress fell, the defenders were wiped out. And yet, its strategic and symbolic impact was so enormous that it's remembered not as a loss, but as a victory of the human spirit. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. What really defines a victory when you look at the grand sweep of history?